Welcome to another episode of the Orange Nerd Show. We're talking the quarterly earnings. We're going to focus, though, on the studio side of the company. We're going to talk about D+. We're going to talk about the studio. We're going to talk about the streaming world and HULU and Netflix and all that good stuff up next. Hey everybody, welcome aboard to another episode of the Orange Nerd Show. Just for those of you not familiar, the Orange Nerd Show focuses primarily on things that are kind of outside the realm of the theme park. So we talk a lot about the studio, the movies, film, TV, the corporate end of it with like Chapek and Susan Arnold and all that fun, good stuff. So today we're going to focus mostly on that. So I want to introduce my panel, and we're going to dive right in. We have a special guest with us again today, Alia. Alia, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. I just noticed like there was hair on my face, so sorry about that if anyone else noticed that before me.
No worries, no worries.
So
you got to do your hair like me. You don't have to worry about that. Just have it up.
I sometimes tend to just to shave it and wear wigs now and then.
There you go.
So
Alia, thank you.
If you could let everybody at home know where they can find you on social media.
Twitter and at Alia Aloha.
Perfect. Alia Aloha. Welcome again. Welcome back to the channel.
Thank you.
By the way, you got a lot of great feedback from my subscribers the last time you were on. I got a lot of comments about bring Alia back.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Really? Thank you.
I did.
Hi, everybody. Thank
you. And producer Dre, Vash Sky, host of Freshly Squeezed, back. How you doing, Dre?
Doing very well. Thank you. Excited to talk about some of these topics because it's a very interesting world out there in the entertainment industry. So I'm excited to dive right into it. But you can find me at Vash Sky. It's right down there. I love having great conversations with you on Twitter, so thank you for reaching out. And the best place to find me is on the channel you're watching right now at OrangeGo55 at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice, news, and info, squeezed fresh right from the grove. So that's where you can find me.
Perfect. And R2D2, if you can introduce yourself. No, just kidding.
Exactly, right? I gotta get some R2D2, some sound bites right there.
So we're gonna dive into this because the Q1, the quarterly earnings came out a few days ago. I don't remember exactly when, but a few days ago, and they were actually very good. I mean, to be quite honest with you, they were really good. And what really drives Wall Street are these Disney Plus subscriber numbers. That's kind of the end all be all for Wall Street. The rest of the company could be completely collapsing. As long as D Plus is making big gains, they're happy. It doesn't matter.
We saw exactly that in 2020.
Right? Yeah, exactly. They don't really care. But Alia, I'll start with you. We saw a subscriber increase from D Plus this quarter, pretty substantial. It was 11.8 million new subscribers compared to the last quarter, which was like very anemic, which was like, I think it was like 2 million. Alia, what are your thoughts on this huge increase?
Well, it makes sense in the sense that they expanded markets, correct? So that makes sense as they're opening up in South Korea and Hong Kong and et cetera, that they would bring in more subscribers. I think then too that they probably also added subscribers in the United States domestically as well. So
yeah, we've heard Kristen McCarthy and Bob Chapek talk about this and how they're kind of a market-driven. They have a kind of a market-driven strategy where pretty much within each quarter you have major markets opening up to them, and that new market opening up has a new wave of subscribers that come along with it. And we also saw where Book of Boba Fett, Hawkeye were positioned in the quarterly in this quarter specifically, and that also brings with it new subscribers, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, Hawkeye, Book of Boba gained a lot of buzz after episode 5 and 6 with the Mando and the Luke Skywalker Grogu stuff. It got a lot of buzz. I wouldn't be surprised if they garnered quite a few subs from that. But there was a lot here in regards to these subscriber numbers. Now, I want to ask Dre, like, what are your thoughts in regards to this? Like, is this kind of like, because this is obviously a very big increase, this quarter. Is it lightning in a bottle, or do you think we're going to see increases like this going forward with Kenobi and things like that? What are your feelings going forward, after this quarter? I mean, can they sustain this, or? So
they have a goal of, I believe, Alia, was it 230 million subscribers by 2024?
I think he's using a range now, Chapek, 230 to 260, something like that. So if it's 230, they'll be happy. If it's 240, 50, etc. But he's giving more of a range now versus before. I think they were more specific with like 240, 250.
Yeah, right. It's going to be right here. Then it's like, well, maybe not. Okay, but no, I think they are on track, roughly, right? You're going to have some down quarters. You're going to have some quarters that supersede expectations. And I think they are on that track. And with their lineup of shows currently, we have, Moon Knight in March now?
March.
We have, I know, exactly, right? We have Obi-Wan Kenobi coming in May 25th, right? So I think they're positioned pretty well to keep this momentum going. They also have a few major markets, if I'm not mistaken, that they have left to open up in. It's just gonna be kind of interesting to see how they battle the churn issue. Obviously, we've heard from Chapek that he wants to have a major new show, or maybe an episode debut every single week. On the flip side, we just had Netflix run some Super Bowl ads yesterday about a new movie every single week. 52 separate productions a year, basically, is what that means. And they I mean, it's an ambitious kind of thing. We also saw a lot of ads. I mean, obviously, because it was hosted by NBC, we saw a lot of Peacock ads and a lot of, that kind of acceleration on the gas pedal there. So it's gonna be quite interesting. Did anybody see the Disney Plus? Some of those ads.
I love Disney, but that commercial was so.
Oh man! So they had like this goat commercial because they were like, "Oh, we had the greatest shows of all time," and you have a bunch of goats kind of dressed up as some of the characters featured in these franchises. It was a little rough. I mean, out of all the streaming ads, that was a little cringe.
Yeah, I don't watch the Super Bowl until like about a day ago. I had no idea who was even playing. I'm not even kidding you. Like I have no idea. I didn't see that Disney Plus GOAT thing. I'm glad I didn't. After hearing what you said about it, I'm really glad I didn't. That sounds
maybe the company's glad you didn't see it either.
But you mentioned Netflix, Dre, and that look, here's the thing. Like, and Alia, you can jump in on this too if you want. Like with Netflix, they have a real issue though, I think, with like, oh man, like, because a lot of these studios, like, like Disney, Comcast, Warner, they're all kind of letting their Netflix licensing deals run out. We saw this with the Marvel stuff, Daredevil, Iron Fist, Punisher, all that. Netflix has a real problem, I think, long term. Right now, they're fine. Netflix right now is the freaking king, and they have amazing original content. I've been addicted to that show, Ozark. Not family friendly, by the way. So just so you guys know at home, if you're going to watch it, don't watch it with your kids. It's not family friendly. But Netflix has some fantastic original programming. But the problem is they're going to be bleeding out bad when all these studios start pulling out and going to their own platforms. Netflix is going to be left doing a lot of their own original stuff, and they're not going to be able to really rely on some of these studios, which is hard. But Alia, what do you think about this whole dynamic? Like with the D Plus, Netflix, all this stuff. What are you feeling on that?
Apparently, with the recent mature Marvel ones, they didn't, from what I've read or heard in a couple of articles, Disney actually paid to get those early. They didn't
Really?
run out.
Ooh.
Disney paid to get those early. That's reports I'm
Really?
seeing. Yes.
The plot thickens.
So Chapek is up to something. I'm wondering if they may appear on Disney Plus in a tile within Marvel Mature, something like that. They might even use it to test parental. It's like a small way to test it.
Oh, wait. Hang on. Making moves.
Some form of parental control, maybe just like a small way to test it. I won't be surprised if something like that happens quickly, because I read in a couple of articles that this is happening earlier than Netflix expected, which means the only conclusion is Disney paid to get them early.
That's fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating. There's a couple of things at play here, because Chapek has expressed desire to have more adult-driven content on the platform, which I actually do support. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of like Disney purists don't like that idea, but even Michael Eisner expanded the brand. Remember, Michael Eisner bought Miramax, which was far from family-friendly. Hollywood Pictures, Touchstone. He understood the necessity of kind of branching out. As long as Chapek sort of like, does it like what you said, Alia, with like, behind a parental control and give parents that option, I'm fine with that, because really, the bulk of the, like for me personally, anecdotally, when I'm leaving Disney Plus is to find content that's more adult driven. Like I mentioned Ozark on Netflix. I love that show. I'm not going to find that on Disney Plus, anything like that about money laundering and cartels. There's no way, but it's like, if you had the Hulu tile or something like that on Disney Plus, I wouldn't have to leave and go to Netflix as often. Right. But what are your thoughts, Ray? What are your thoughts on this whole thing? I mean, making moves on this adult content, things like that.
I think the brand association with Disney Plus is, while it is a wonderful asset when it comes to general audiences, especially families and so forth, it is kind of an inhibitor to growth when it comes to that segment of the market, right? So I think they really do want to, they want to branch out, and they're kind of in a catch-22 when it comes to that, because it's Disney Plus, right? You have a brand kind of awareness and kind of a brand association when it comes to the Disney name, right? But then you also kind of do want to get into those markets, and I'm sure Wall Street does as well. It's kind of interesting because we're seeing, like, in the UK, for example, a lot of people were noticing that on the UK version of Disney Plus, when it comes up, Pam and Tommy's right there, right? It's like, that is right. That is a very, that's kind of an entire series made around a sex tape and all this kind of stuff. That's not necessarily what you would associate with Disney here in the States. So we already kind of see them making moves in that direction. Yeah. I think they might need to be maybe a little bit more nuanced when it comes to that, a little bit more careful when it comes to that kind of debut of that kind of content on Disney Plus itself. But like you said, Alia, I think you make a great point in that you can kind of limit it maybe with parental access codes or something to kind of delineate between your child going on Disney Plus versus you going on Disney Plus. And I think it's going to be a really fascinating thing if they really did buy that content to put it on maybe Disney Plus or Hulu. That's going to be a very interesting thing. Maybe that's their way of saying, hey, look, this can be a little bit more adult oriented too, without being necessarily like Ozark, for example.
Right. And the interesting thing about the Marvel stuff is it's kind of like there's multiple layers here kind of with that, because like there's that Chapek aspect where he's, making moves.
He's making moves.
But then there's also this aspect of Kevin Feige. Yeah. Because Kevin Feige, we've already seen Marvel sort of dip into these characters with Vincent D'Onofrio reprising his role as Daredevil in the Hawkeye show. We've already seen that. So I think Kevin Feige probably wants to get his hands on these characters, and I believe so. Daredevil made an appearance in Spider-Man: No Way Home, and what have you. So
there was a I mean, when these shows were being developed, it was with the understanding that they were part of the MCU. I believe in those series as they reference like the Avengers incident in New York and stuff like that. I mean, it was always from what I heard at the time that these characters were going to be integrated, were part of the MCU upon inception, creation, and production. But that kind of skewed a little bit, as we know, and maybe rights did have a part to play in that. But I think Kevin Feige, I think you're right, OG. I think he wants to get these hands on these characters, and he wants to get them back and integrate them even more, even more closer to the MCU than currently established.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fascinating. There's so many different things going on with this. It's absolutely wild. And I think even Daddy Iger mentioned, I think back in 2018, that he really wants to bring the franchises home, right?
Yes.
Like he wants a one-stop shop, right? In terms of Marvel and all this stuff. And he's going to, so I'm sure Bob Chapek is sort of in agreement with that. It's good for him.
Well, do you think, I know we don't necessarily talk about the parks
sure.
on Orange Nerd, but do you think, because, we can kind of see that maybe Chapek does have those ambitions as well, right? Bring it all under one umbrella. Let's consolidate our franchises and bring them home and really capitalize on them, both in the studio and the theme park setting. But when you talk about theme parks, does this lend a little bit more momentum or credence to the idea that Chapek might be looking at those theme park rights when it comes to Marvel in Florida and going, maybe it's time to bring this one home? I mean, that is a possibility if they're willing to shell out big money, assuming they shell out money for this kind of stuff. Are they willing to go that extra step and finally, regain these rights or retain these rights that have been such a sticking point when it comes to the investment out in Florida?
No, absolutely. I think Disney wants to have 100% control of all these, especially Marvel, which is like it's like basically it prints money for Disney. The
most successful franchise in history.
Exactly. What do you think, Alia? I mean, in regards to this, about bringing these franchises home under one roof, and whether it be for streaming, whether it be for movies, whether it be for theme parks, what are your feelings on that?
I agree. I think I would not be surprised if we read it in the paper or something soon that Disney has paid the money to acquire the theme park rights from Universal. I actually think they worked something out with Universal about the Hulk character, because there's some people saying that they were surprised She-Hulk is happening or happened because of based on their understanding of the agreement with Universal. Right. So just the existence of She-Hulk shows that something happened behind the scenes.
So that's an interesting point, because we always thought of the some of these characters' rights only being with Fox, but no, they went out to numerous places, and one of those was Universal getting the rights to Hulk. So that's a very fascinating thing. I never really considered that, but that is true.
Yeah. Alia, that's a fascinating point.
Big rumors, plans that She-Hulk is going to set off into motion, like War Hulk or something like that. So, wow. And it could be a movie though on Disney Plus, maybe not theatrical, because theatrical right now is more about the newer characters or the combo films, etc. But yeah, I think that's proof right there that they worked something out with Universal, and they're going to want to work out more with Universal, especially about theme parks.
Fascinating.
That's just my guess.
Alia, you're brilliant, and you.
Sorry, you guys.
This is the thing with Alia. She always throws me for a loop. There's always a surprise with it. Like it's like, oh my God, you're right. Oh, wild.
I mean, that's very interesting. We saw something, Alia brings up this great point, astutely, might I add, about this kind of these characters being kind of a stepping stone to bigger, better things. We saw this kind of joint venture between Sony and Disney when it came to the Spider-Man character, and now we've gotten 3 major films. No Way Home is an incredible success. We're seeing the expansion of those ideas. I mean, could this be kind of this kind of mutual olive branch, so to speak, to kind of get this ball rolling? I think it's a very fascinating thing.
It is. It's very fascinating. Now, I want to pivot just a little bit.
Sure.
This is a little bit more of a controversial topic for some, because there's a lot of passions in whether you're on one side or the other. It's the theatrical versus the streaming end of it. And Chapek kind of, and Chapek likes to do this. I think he kind of his comments about Encanto, I think could very well be.
It's our new franchise.
It's our new franchise, and there's a lot going on here. So let's discuss this real quick, because there's a lot to talk about with this. And this is courtesy of WDWNT.com. It says here, Disney CEO Bob Chapek cites Encanto as proof that streaming is the future. Fastest title to meet 200 million hours on D+. And it kind of goes on to say here that essentially that Encanto suffered from a poor box office, but within days of its release on D+, it began trending worldwide and merchandise sales increased. Chapek also repeatedly referred to Encanto as a franchise, as Alia just mentioned, through whether he is referencing more content or just including more merchandise remains to be seen. So this is fascinating. And Dre, I'll start with you because Dre, you're more of that theater perspective. You love the theater experience, you do. Yeah. What are your thoughts in regards to Chapek's comments? Is it discouraging? Is it out of touch? How do you feel about what he's saying here in regards to Encanto?
No, I think he's, as we say all the time, I think he's following the data. I mean, look, I think when it comes to these kind of films, and this is why I think a lot of people are miffed at Pixar, but when you really think about it, Pixar are kind of those 4-quadrant films that really bring out families and people with extended families and so forth to the theaters, and now that prospect I think has changed a little bit, and consumer patterns and trends have changed as a result. And so I think that's why, I mean, we saw this with Trolls in 2020, right? We saw we saw a lot of momentum for family films when it came to the streaming side than we did with the theatrical side, right? And I think he's kind of looking at that. I think he's kind of saying, hey, look, this theatrical release of this movie didn't really do that well, but on streaming it did extremely well. And I think that's a result of the consumer patterns changing within the demographics. I think for event pictures, I think for films that where you have maybe a younger audience, maybe doesn't have kids, maybe is going on a date, maybe has a couple of buddies, they're going to be looking at the theatrical experience much differently than maybe than maybe a family would. And so I think like films like Encanto or even Pixar and so forth, I think they do have a home on Disney Plus, at least until maybe theatrical, maybe the consumer patterns change. But for right now, I think the event films like Spider-Man No Way Home, like Shang-Chi and others, I think they do have a home in the theatrical space. Maybe not necessarily everything going to one or the other without taking those kind of things into account.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is really kind of a lot of times the discussion around this stuff is either it kind of comes down to like an either or scenario. And Dre, you mentioned you really brought up the nuance that really is, I think, the reality of what we're going through here. I don't think any of this debate is either or. Like, it's really going to be data driven. It's going to be option driven. It's going to be, like you said, Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, event films are going to be more driven and more, more that theatrical experience. You have these smaller family films like Encanto, which will be more driven on like the streaming platforms. It is very much option based. But Alia, what are your thoughts on Chapek's comments in regards to Encanto and, kind of like reaffirming this whole thing about these family films really doing well on D+?
Well, I think he's also responding to people claiming that franchises can't be built off streaming. He's saying, well, explain Encanto. It didn't take off till it was on Disney+. Sure. I think ideally, because I'm an AMC A-list member, I'm okay with the theatrical experience. I don't want that to go away. I think ideally they would like to do the 30 days in theaters and then Disney+, or 45 days in theater and then Disney+. But they're not going to continue that if by chance the film underperforms if media, especially pro-theatrical media, states it's disappointing, it flopped, it's a failure, why would Disney continue then to put out their movies risking such headlines when if they take them straight to Disney Plus, they're not going to get such a headline? So in a way, a lot of the pro-theatrical media is shooting themselves in the foot when they then are Encanto failed, Encanto flopped.
Well, that's a good point, because look, you take something like Star Wars Solo, the Solo film. I mean, I think that film would have been better served if it didn't have those headlines of the first Star Wars flop ever. If it would have been a direct, we're talking totally hypothetical, after the fact kind of thing. But if that movie would have went straight to Disney Plus, you wouldn't have had those headlines. Would the perception of that film and its success or failure have been different if it didn't have those headlines? Probably so. What do you think, Dre?
No, I think that's exactly why Disney likes the streaming space, because they can control that narrative so much more effectively than having, box office figures, be wide open to the public, right? I mean, if we're kind of this metric driven when it comes to success or failure, to be able to control those metrics so well, or at least to maybe look at them from a different perspective and, shoot that out as the narrative going forward. I mean, that's a very attractive proposition, especially when it, like you said, OG, when it comes to the perception of a film, when it comes to the reception of a film from, Wall Street's end. I mean, I think that was one of the big benefits of doing it this way. There's not really they're getting better, I will say, but there's not really a good way of gauging success or failure when it comes to Disney Plus in the same way that you can with box office. And I think Chapek's kind of big thing, moreover, is he talks about the zeitgeist. He talks about the pop culture and so to speak. And that was kind of one of the things that I was saying before, was the impact on culture, right? How much buzz is this certain product generating or not generating and so forth. And it's clear with Encanto, what he's trying to present is, hey, look, we did get an increase in sales. We didn't get an increase in kind of user generated traffic, not just with Disney, not just on Disney Plus, but with social media and so forth. People were really talking about it. And I think that, that is kind of a defining thing for Disney going forward, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Go ahead, Ali. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say the pro-theatrical crowd kind of tried to stir it up again, because Sing 2 recently grossed 300 million, a little bit over 300 million. So they went again with the Encanto or Turning Red. And it's just, guys, either movie cost 100 million, you make your point, but Disney spends at least 150 million plus on their animated features, both from Walt Disney Animation Studios and Pixar. You're still not making the point. If anything, you're just reminding Disney they would have wasted more money. So
correct.
It's just
correct. Yeah. That's a terrible argument when you work with those figures.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And look, no one knows the numbers better than Chapek and Disney. And this has been my thing since day one, is if something is successful, they wouldn't if something is successful, they're going to repeat it. Right.
Yeah.
If something isn't working, they're not going to repeat it. And the fact that the Pixar movies, they're constantly throwing them direct to D plus tells me internally, whether we know the numbers 100% or not, tells me that they're happy with what they're seeing. Because otherwise they wouldn't keep doing it. Chapek is not about losing money. He's just not,
I mean, yeah, we're way past the Shang-Chi experimental phase, right? I mean, if you have a pattern developing, that's obviously probably in line with trends. But also, too, I mean, we're talking about a very volatile market as well. And as Chapek has astutely pointed out, hey, you know what? We're not going to be... we're not going to be married to one distribution platform to another, even though we might have patterns right now. Consumer trends is they're changing all the time. Yep. So we have to be more in line with that. So he really wants kind of this kind of flexible distribution platform, rather than, hey, this is the way it's always been, or this is what you do, and kind of established market principles. It's just throw all that out the window. I mean, this is kind of where the Disney company is going.
Yeah. And it's funny because, and I was so wrong. I'll call it right now. I was so wrong. When Chapek was announced as CEO, I'm like, oh, this guy's going to be like Tim Cook. He's going to kind of, just kind of rest on the laurels and kind of be a boring CEO and kind of like and he really hasn't been, whether you love him or hate him. This guy does not mind stirring the pot at all. This guy is all about disruption. He does not care if Hollywood's mad or he's going to do what he wants to do. And I'm really surprised by that. I'm really surprised at how he's approached this, because I really did think of him more of a Tim Cook, kind of like, now the product's going to come in rose gold. And he really hasn't been. He's been much more of a disruptor than he has kind of just like riding coattails. Whether you hate his decisions or not, he's been a lot more disruptive than I expected, at least.
Do you think this characterization is correct, Alia, that maybe he would have come off, like you said, OG, as somebody who's like less of a disruptor if given the time to do so? I think he would have stretched out these decisions maybe, over various years rather than like months or weeks. Right. I think he was really thrown out in the fire, and it's like, we got to make this work or else the company's going down. Like, we have to make substantial changes now in order to stave off, any number of things that could happen to the company, especially when the stock price just tanked after, what is it, maybe March or April of 2020. So do you get that vibe, Alia, or was he always going to just like, hey, I'm going to, take this hammer and whack it through, right from jump.
Dropped into it. Exactly. He's dropped into it during a really rough time. His contract runs out before you know it, this time next year. And so around this time next year. And so, yes, he's just pedal to the metal. Just I'm going to get things done.
But you think, you think he's kind of been forced in that position.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
I agree with you. I think he would have stretched decisions out more of time, and Wall Street allowed for it. But right now he has to make this decision and this decision and this decision and this decision.
I agree.
It's not an easy position to be in, it's, and this is the thing that I get frustrated with the fandom, is that it's so easy just to be like, oh, Chapek's making cuts. Oh, Chapek's doing this, Chapek's doing that. But you got to understand, and I don't think the fandom really understands the gravity of this. He was literally appointed the CEO in February 2020, right before the pandy hit.
Yeah.
This guy he was literally thrown into the boat while it was sinking. And Iger said, you know what, fix it. It's a tough spot to be in, and it's like, and Iger didn't have to deal with that early on. Right. Iger could go in there and he can buy Oswald and he can buy Pixar and he can make all these moves. But Chapek really didn't have that luxury, because it was more about survival of the company for the first year than it was about any of these niceties or any of these cool things, right? It was survival mode, basically. Absolutely.
And the perception, like Bob Iger, he's cool as a cucumber, he makes you feel good, he's got this, he's got this sweater, relaxing presence, so to speak. And Chapek just, let's be honest, just does not come off in the same way. And so
he's working on his persona, though.
He is.
The video that there you are up there.
Yeah.
OG recently posted his CNBC interview, and I noticed he's smiling more. He's more personable. He was blinking during the interview, so I am noticing improvements. He is working on that.
Right, but he didn't, like I said, he didn't even have luxury to work on that. So you've got this kind of guy that's kind of brash and this kind of outsider when it comes to the more established entertainment spaces, and he's making these huge moves, and it caught a lot of people off guard, and I'm sure that reflected what he was experiencing at the time as well. But now the handlers have gotten him a little bit. It's like, okay, look, listen, let's work on the tone, let's work on how you phrase things. Yeah, exactly. Let's, don't point. Let's go ahead and curl it up right there. And, it's all these kind of like little things in order to better ingratiate yourself, not just with fans, not just with, the public perception, but also with shareholders and so forth. But also, too, it's like you can kind of see where he's kind of thinking about taking the entire company at large as well, and is making those moves, I think, pretty effectively. I think, look, like you said, OG, people get, they get really upset when it comes to the parks and what those changes are bringing with them, but the market realities of the situation, like I said, is far more nuanced. Unfortunately, we don't have time to really deep dive into it here. Maybe it's not the appropriate venue for that anyway. Maybe it's more suited to a traditional Orange Go 55 video. But I'm just saying, I mean, there's the market's changing a lot. The economic conditions are very they're very volatile right now, and so expect more changes like this in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have a few minutes. Do you want to tackle Christine McCarthy's for a few minutes before we go?
Yeah, okay.
We don't have a whole lot of time, but
you have a whole lot of time.
Theory, maybe devil's advocate, her point of view.
Oh, okay. All right, good. Then I will go ahead and set this up nicely. So, Christine, I like to say Christine Wastelands McCarthy. Look, hey, she put her foot in her mouth. That's gonna be her name now. And unfortunately,
I was like, oh no.
Well, it's a moniker that's gonna stick with her because apparently she said recently that, we're not too interested. Thank you very much, OG. She said live events will likely be the last thing to return in parks in a post-COVID world. She said fireworks and parades are where people gather, quote, and we don't want our guests to feel the density. Okay, that's just gaslighting now. That's just an outrageous statement. I don't even know where that actually comes from, because it's like, look, everything that you've done ever since about like October of 2021 has been, this kind of, very kind of demand-driven thing. You've engaged in practices that exacerbate this density. They don't necessarily relieve it at all. And we see, anybody who's actually been in the parks knows that this density is an issue, right? A lot of people were talking about January being one of the busiest Januaries that they've remember in recent history. And so it's like, how can you say, this is, by the way, from the 50th, how can you say that you're attempting to alleviate this density when all of your practices have engaged in it actively? It's completely outrageous.
Well, yeah. Well, here's the thing. Yeah, it's weird. It's one of those statements that I think is true and false at the same time. And what I mean by that is I think that at one point in time, I think that it was true. I think that they didn't want to have the shows, the parades, the fireworks, all that stuff because of density early on in the pandy, right? When the parks first opened, I think her statement was 100% true. I think that was an absolute concern.
I would agree.
Right now, late or mid-February of 2022, I don't think that's the case anymore. No. So I think that at this point, it's more about cost saving. They know they have to bring them back eventually. But if we can kind of drag it a little bit longer, I think that they're cool with it, So I think at one point it was true. I think right now, though, it is not. But Alia, what are your thoughts on this?
It's technically true when you consider that international visitors aren't back in droves yet. There's still a lot of restrictions on their arrival, and they're a big market for Walt Disney World, especially.
20% of annual visitation, by the way.
Whoa. And so they're not yet back in force. And so I think she's kind of saying that considering they're not in the picture yet, we're managing the density. But I promise you, once those countries start opening things up and the international travelers can arrive in the numbers that they used to arrive, that's when Disney will start to ease the pressure on those restrictions.
So yeah, I will agree with
overlap.
I will agree with you in that kind of the reasoning for that. I think for
with her
right.
Her
I think
to things. So yeah,
OG is right in that the reason has evolved into an excuse. Right. It's, they're stretching these kind of things out and the shareholders, the quarterly earnings report did talk about how international visitation was a big part of their business and how they would want that back. I do agree with that. And from what I'm hearing, just kind of, my sources / experts on this stuff, I think we'll see from a lot of these countries, pretty much the majority of the Western world will probably get rid of their restrictions anywhere from 3 to 6 months if these kind of trends and paces continue, and that would allow for the return of international visitations and so forth and stuff like that. But I don't know. To me, it just kind of seems like they're spreading this out over time in order to make the next quarter, each successive quarter, look better than the previous one, right? I mean, we heard about Electrical Parade, I think, I don't know, back in early winter of 2021.
Yeah.
And we haven't really heard about what's going to happen there. Well, I mean, if you're positioning that to bump up attendance during the spring, well, that's when you bring something like that out. We've already seen parades like Ookie Pookie Bash at these parks, the Christmas celebrations on the various coasts and stuff like that. And it's like, yes, I understand where Kristen McCarthy is coming from, but she's hiding a lot in that statement, and that's why I say that's gaslighting. It's just like this is not a reason. This is now an excuse for why you're not doing some of these things, and so it's I don't know. It's discouraging to see her say this, which is why it's Christine Wastelands McCarthy now.
You may presume that Wall Street understood what she was trying to say, but at the same time, yeah, she should have elaborated that.
Go ahead.
Until international travelers can arrive, density is really a relative term until we can have everyone who wants to visit kind of thing.
Well, yeah, McCarthy. The thing is, she's a CFO. She definitely doesn't have the polish of a Bob Iger at all. She doesn't have the political. I mean, the public relations kind of chops that some executives have. She is very much an accountant or a finance person, and that's her job, and that's great. That's fine. So, but when she says stuff, I think a lot of times she doesn't have like that mindset that a lot of like more like PR minded people would have. Like if I say the waistline comment, how's that going to go over on social media? If I say the density comment, how's that going to go over on social media? I don't think she really has that. That's just not her thing. It's not her forte. My question though is, and this is interesting because it's really popular with park fans to say like Chapek bad, Tomorrow good, right? But we have to understand here, if there is a desire to boost quarterly earnings, I gotta say it, Tomorrow has a vested interest in doing this. So is it a Tomorrow?
That looks good for him. That's true.
It looks good for him. It only helps Tomorrow. I mean, it helps Chapek too, but it really helps Tomorrow in terms of promotions going forward and things like that.
Certainly solidifies his position.
Oh, totally. So is this his call or is it a directive from above? And I don't know if we'll ever know that, but
sure. The interplay between CEO and the head of the consumer products, experiences, and parks division is definitely a very interesting interplay to be had. The CEO has varying degrees of influence over the years, and it's like, who's making the call here? I've expressed to you, OG. I mean, the fact that Josh DiMaggio doesn't get more heat is just outrageous. It's just crazy. I mean, it's like, look, almost all these decisions have been made with Josh DiMaggio at the helm. We didn't blame Iger for the decisions Chapek made, right? So why are we not blaming DiMaggio for the decisions that he's making as opposed to Chapek? It's like, this is the bad guy, so we're just going to pit everything on him. And here's good old boy DiMaggio doing what he can, with the directive of Chapek. Oh, gosh. It's like, what planet are you living on? This is ridiculous.
And this is the thing I got a lot of comments recently in a video we did. I don't remember what video it was exactly, but a lot of people saying, it's fair to blame Chapek for the park stuff now because the buck stops here, right? And that's fine. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. If you want to have the mindset or, to say like, okay, the buck stops here, it's the CEO's fault. Fine. That's fine. But where was that mindset when Bob Iger was CEO and Chapek ran the parks division? It wasn't Bob Iger's fault the entire time. It was Bob Chapek's. You can't say the buck stops here when it's Chapek the CEO, but the buck sure as hell didn't stop when it was Bob Iger CEO. It wasn't
consistency.
I mean, daily operational decisions. I mean, is it Chapek going into, I don't know, Village Haas at Walt Disney World and going, that chicken sandwich, that's got to be $16.35. Can't be $13.35. That's way too low. The margins are not. No, that would be Josh D'Amaro and his team setting those prices. I mean, what? It's outrageous. It's the craziest thing ever.
Right.
Now, look, if you want to talk about CapEx, investment at the park overall, that's a whole other discussion, and I will agree with you that the CEO and probably the CFO has a lot of influence when it comes to that. But these decisions, these low-level decisions, these daily operational decisions, they're made by Chapek. I'm sorry, Josh D'Amaro and below. They're not made by Chapek. This is he has placed Josh D'Amaro in that position to make those decisions on a daily basis, not to manage it himself. I mean, unless you want to say that Josh D'Amaro's a figurehead and he has no control, unless you want to say that, then what's he doing there? Again, It stops at D'Amaro as well.
Right, and if he is a figurehead and he has no power, then every good thing that happens at the park is thanks to Chapek.
Thank you, Chapek. I do appreciate it.
So they can't. That's the thing, and that's the thing that it really frustrates me. It's perfectly fine and justified in many cases to criticize and slam Bob Chapek. You just have to be consistent, and you just have to understand that, like, you have to, if you're going to set the rules got to apply. You can't be like, well, I don't like his personality though, so now the buck stops here. Doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that. I think, unfortunately, we don't have the time to do it now, but I'd love to get into maybe another video with you, OG, and Alia, you're definitely invited, about maybe, because people, I mean, I saw you have a conversation with somebody online about, prices and so forth, and maybe why those prices.
To and fro you were having, OG.
And maybe why, to take a much more nuanced and critical look at that as to what might be driving those decisions and what we can expect in the future. I think that would be a really good discussion for later on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to thank you both so much for coming on today. It was a fantastic conversation. We dove into a lot of different stuff. We even dipped into the parks a little bit. It was really, really fun. I'm going to go through the panel. We're going to close it out. Mr. Vash Sky, if you can let everybody at home know where they can find you on social media, sir.
Best place to find me is at Vash Sky. Love having conversations with you on there. It's just right how it's spelled. There you go. Put it in the Google search. I should pop up. And the best place to see me is on the channel you're watching right now at OrangeCo55 at Freshly Squeezed. Your source for juicy news and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove. So that is where you can find me, right there.
And Alia, aloha, if you can let everybody at home know where they can find you on social media.
Twitter, Alia Aloha, at Alia Aloha, and then on here now and then when I'm invited. Thank you, you guys.
Perfect. Yeah, give her a follow. She fantastic insight. Alia always blows my mind with the angle she comes at with some of the stuff, like the She-Hulk thing. I like a lot of stuff. It's really, really it's brilliant. It really is. So, but I want to thank you both so much for coming on today. I want to thank you all so much for watching this episode of the Orange Nerd Show. Like, subscribe, comment down below, and as always, have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you very much.